So to conclude our series on beauty this week, we're talking about beauty and social change, the beauty of social change. And I'm reading once again from John O'Donoghue's book called Beauty. While beauty gladdens our hearts, it makes us lonely too for what cannot be. True beauty is woven through the heart of life and is ever engaged with forces of ignorance, darkness, ugliness, and negativity. Yet dominion and power are not beauty's way. Beauty works from within these conflicts of forces, and her brightening may or may not appear. Where beauty seems absent, she is often hidden and still at work in the slow industry of transformation. So much of beauty is not immediately apparent, and indeed it could take a long time before it becomes visible. It often takes a lot of struggle and committed attention and generosity, even sacrifice, in order to create beauty.
I have Psalm 50 as translated by Nan Merrill. The beloved, through the energy of love, brought forth the world. From the rising to the setting sun, love radiates out to all the nations perfect in beauty. The beloved has come and will not keep silence. For divine love is a consuming fire, calling forth heaven and earth to the judgment of all peoples. Gather around, my loyal friends, all who by repentance and recompense follow the inner way. The universe forever proclaims justice, and the beloved's indwelling presence guides those who hear with their hearts. All who surrender to the love of the great mystery, whose hearts are merciful and kind, will go in beauty and walk with grace. And all whose reverence love's eternal flame will know love's companioning presence.
Would you pray with me? Beautiful one, the concept of beauty is sometimes very difficult to grasp in its entirety. It is so much more than just looks, but an expanded consciousness and a way of seeing, a way of knowing that which is filled with your light and your life. May we broaden our minds this morning. May we seek beauty in all of its forms. And may we be beauty. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, bring us closer to your wisdom and your insight. Amen. So, spiritual seekers suggest that beauty is more even than we have just talked about in the last couple of weeks. It's more than something that's deep within our soul. It's more than something that expands our consciousness and connects us to one another and to the divine and to everything in the universe. When we've touched beauty, in all of its many forms, whether it's an aesthetic beauty or an action or a heart that's set forth for all to see, when we've touched it, it moves us to want to do more for the world, to do good in the world. Some writers have used the word admonished, which is a word that we don't ever use, but that beauty admonishes us, that beauty impels us, urgently advises us to do more for the world, to create, to preserve, to protect. There's two wildlife photographers by the name of Christina Mittermeier and Paul Nicklin. They're biologists and National Geographic wildlife photographers, which sounds like a really cool job, doesn't it? They said this: beauty has less to do with the material things around us and more to do with how we spend our time on Earth. We create true beauty only when we channel our energy to achieve a higher purpose, to build strong communities, and model our behavior so that others can find inspiration to do better by each other and by the planet. Beauty is all about how we spend our time and our energy to create more beauty around us, to protect and preserve and create in our communities, in our children, in our environment. We're talking about today about the beauty of social change. This is not, I'm going to say specific social change. Social change that's for the good of the people, not social change that's been forced on people because of a domineering or a dictator government or an oppressive regime. This is beautiful because it's social change for the benefit of the world and of nature and of creation and of equality and fairness and justice. That's the kind of social change that we're talking about, that if beauty is going to admonish us to do something, it will be those sorts of things. So, John O'Donohue reminds us that beauty is in the midst of all kinds of ugliness, right? That quote, he says, social change is not a nice, neat kind of thing, right? It's often very messy and very complex and takes a really long time to get anything to go anywhere. And there are hurt feelings, and there's anger, and there can be ugliness, there can even be violence. So John O'Donohue says that in the midst of even all of that, even in the midst of ugliness and violence and cruelty and negativity, beauty is in the midst of it, working for hope and for light. And when I read him, beauty is interchangeable with God. So if you want to, when I say beauty with a capital B, if you want to hear God, that works. If you want to hear the divine or sacred presence or however you want to understand that, to me it's all the same thing. But in this, if we think of something, the power of beauty is to move us emotionally and spiritually. When we see a beautiful act, when we see a beautiful scene, when we see a beautiful piece of art, it moves us emotionally and spiritually. And that's what happens in social change, maybe in slightly different ways, but it's people's actions and impact that we look at and we go, that's beautiful, and it's striving for beautiful in the world. Am I making sense? Because I know this is a really kind of hard thing to grasp. So the psalm that I chose reflected that for me. It says, the universe forever proclaims justice, and the beloved's indwelling presence guides those who hear with their hearts, all who surrender to the love of great mystery, whose hearts are merciful and kind, will go in beauty and walk in grace. So in layperson's terms, basically it says that the divine dwells within each of us. And when we connect with that pure, loving, beautiful presence, it will manifest in our lives. In beauty and grace, in good works, in all things that make this world a better place. So, I know life is challenging, and it's not just our personal lives. We go through our joys and concerns here every Sunday, and I know that a lot of concerns aren't ever raised out loud, right? They're raised in the cries of our heart because we're private people. Sometimes we don't want to bring attention to ourselves if there are our own pain. Life is difficult personally. Life is also difficult socially. When we look around us, it feels like all we're seeing are poor kids who are being stabbed and the violence that's going on around us. We're watching the wars at the news and people being displaced. We're seeing flooding disasters and how that's affecting people. Everywhere we turn, there's something just really difficult and heart-wrenching that's going on out there. There's inequality and unfairness and injustice all around the world. Seeking beauty in the midst of it all can be a real challenge. To try and find it in the midst of turmoil and grief, and it takes some real diligence on our part to watch for the movements that are beauty in the midst of it. To watch for beauty as social change. So what are the characteristics of that? To try and get a handle on that, how would you name that? What does beauty look like in the midst of those difficult situations, in the midst of trying to make the world a better place? People helping people, absolutely. What characteristics, what actions? Listening. And compassion, the presence, just to be with someone. Prayers, to deliberately send your energy somewhere. What about courage? The courage to stand up and stand with. How about risking? To take a risk to be there for someone else. Determination. You all can jump in anytime. Recognizing? What did you say? Recognizing. So to see the beauty, we actually have to be aware. Yes. To recognize the little tiny points of light that are out there, the little gems. We need to watch for the courage, for the strength. Some of those gifts that were in that book are needed for social change. To have the strength within us, to have the courage within us, to have the determination within us. Sometimes it takes sacrifice. A lot of people who've sacrificed their time, their energy, their money, their lives for social change. I think there is beauty in people marching and protesting when it's nonviolent. There's beauty in going to the voting polls and being able to vote how we feel. There are countries where you can't do that. There's beauty in advocacy. There's beauty in creativity. All of those kinds of things are needed for social change. We're just not programmed to look for beauty in those kinds of things. And my question for the day is, what would our world look like if beauty were our guiding principle? If we asked ourselves, personally first, is what's coming out of my mouth beautiful? Is my action beautiful? And then what would happen if our governments said, what would be the beautiful thing to do in this situation? What if our schools asked, what's the beautiful thing to do in this situation? How would that change our world, our lives? Now maybe we'd be taking care of nature, preserving nature instead of consuming it. Maybe all of our kids, instead of just Amanda's kids that she teaches, would know from the time we were little that they're beautiful and so is everybody else. Maybe we'd be able to look around and see the sacred worth in every human being. Maybe we'd put more money into music and art than we would into the military. Maybe we'd see that equality and fairness and justice weren't just things to say, but things to be and things to do, that we wouldn't be threatened by somebody of a different color, or a different sexual orientation, or a different ethnicity, or a different religion, if beauty were our guiding force. So a pastor named Karen Johnson, who said, you know what, as we're looking for beauty in all of this turmoil and all of this craziness of the world, her guiding words were sort of, where beauty is hidden, reveal it. Where beauty is ruined, restore it. And where beauty is absent, create it. Each of those things are our challenge, to reveal and to restore and to create beauty in the world. So how do we do that? What does it look like? Let me give you some examples of what beauty looks like in social change in action. When a Seattle businessman read a newspaper headline that said that Native American people were freezing in their homes on the reservations, he was shocked. And soon an opportunity was presented to him to adopt through a program, to adopt a grandmother, a Native American grandmother. And so he adopted this Native American grandmother actually on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And he went to visit her in her trailer home where she and a number of her family lived, this dilapidated, falling apart home where they huddled around a wood stove to try and keep warm. And he was moved to gather her neighbors and his friends and to build her a house so that she could be warm for the winter. And then he took it one step further and he said, well, what if that was one person? What about all of these other hundreds of thousands of people on the reservations who don't have adequate housing? And he quit his job, sold off his half of the company he had just recently started, and created a nonprofit to try to serve the Native Americans on the reservations, to help them to have better lives, better housing, better resources. That's beautiful. A number of years ago, there was a Christian church in the Bible Belt down south who overcame their fears and their prejudices and put out a big welcome sign on their front yard that welcomed the Memphis Islamic Cultural Center, who had bought land and were moving in across the street. They befriended the folks of that different religion when most of those folks were pretty afraid of what their reception was going to be. And then when the building wasn't done in time, they invited the Muslims to come in and celebrate Ramadan, a whole month of Ramadan in their facilities. That's beautiful. When the white Anglo-conservative churches in Southern California start to get to know the Hispanic churches in the neighborhood, and they do things together, and they get to know each other's faith, and they get to know each other's families, and then they band together for better immigration policies. That's beautiful. Anybody ever been to Los Palmitos in Mexico? There was an artist collective who decided that they would paint a mural in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. A neighborhood that was pretty much all cement and concrete. Now, the houses are built on hillsides. So when they created this mural, they painted 209 houses with bright colors. And when you stood back, like away from the hill, you could see the design on the sides of these houses. They wanted to bring some life and some beauty to a neighborhood where it was, people were closed up and they were afraid, and they did much more than they ever could have imagined. Suddenly, all of these bright colors and that helped to make the neighborhood more beautiful brought people out into the streets. And they got to know their neighbors, and now people were hanging out in their streets, getting to know one another, and taking some pride in their neighborhood, and wanting to make the neighborhood more secure, and taking steps to do that. The whole project was so successful that they planned more of those sorts of things in poor neighborhoods. That's beautiful in so many ways. You know, when we put up a booth at the Juneteenth Day rally, we support our African American friends and neighbors. When we show up at an LGBTQ pride rally, those things are beautiful. When we collect food and serve at the hot meal program on Monday, and all of a sudden we find out that we're going to have to serve 40 more people than we thought we were going to have to serve. And within a couple of days, everybody steps up and we've got that covered. That's beautiful. You know, when Nancy Gibson, a number of months ago, decided that the Afghan refugees in Fort McCoy needed some clothes, and she took it on herself to start doing that, and then other people came along, and other churches came along, and we got involved, and that's beautiful. That's sacred presence working in us to make the world a more beautiful place, a more just place, a more fair place, a more equitable place, a more loving, compassionate, kind place. And sometimes it takes courage from us, and sometimes it takes a little bit of sacrifice from us. And sometimes it just takes getting off the couch. We all have the gifts to do it. Jim Wallace tells a story about his wife who was driving their 9-year-old son, Jack, to school. And on the radio was a song by John Mayer, Waiting for the World to Change. Anybody remember that song? Waiting on the world to change, right? And he listened to it as a song, you know, it talks about all the things that are going wrong, and then it's the refrain, we're waiting on the world to change. And little Jack speaks up and says, that's wrong! We can't just wait for the world to change, we have to be the change. That's it. We have to get off our sofas, and we have to get out into the world, and we have to ask ourselves, what would beauty do in this situation? What would beauty say in this situation? And remember that a little fairy godmother, when we were born, gave us all those 12 gifts to use. And more that are special to each one of us. So if beauty is going to admonish us today, she's going to say, go out and be beauty. Be brave, be courageous, be risk, be light, be joy, be hope. Be beautiful in the world, because it doesn't just change the world, it transforms our souls. Amen.